Welcome everyone to the Compliance Corner. Today, I'm Milan and I'm really excited to have Ryan Buckner here with us. Ryan is or as he goes by Buck, is a 20-year Schellman veteran of audit and the CPA and the Chief Knowledge Officer for Schellman. So without further ado, I'm going to bring Buck on board here. Hey Buck, good to have you.
Hey Milan, how's it going?
Going great, thanks. Just wanted to let everyone know a couple of housekeeping things that we are taking questions, and we hope you do ask questions. So as we kind of go through, please do put questions in the chat. And what I'd say is that if you put Q colon, it'll definitely pop up, and we will get to all questions for sure. So let's Ryan, why don't you Buck, why don't you tell people a little about yourself and what you do today?
I sure will, and hopefully I do you all proud, because that intro music, the dulcet tones, that was very pleasant to listen to. So hopefully I do honor to the musical introduction there. And by the way, because you said questions, I got to be honest with you, Milan. I've got a bit of a superpower here. I answer every question, and I really work hard to not say it depends. All right. So if anybody does have a question, if they put in that Q colon, I'm probably going to answer it, even if it makes me look bad. And I promise to not say it depends. So with that being said, yes, I've been with the firm here for about 20 years, just over 20 years. I was the first auditor hired by the founder, Chris Schellman. And my job over the years really changed quite a bit. It in certain respects has remained the same. When we were competing all those years ago, it was important for us to really know our stuff. We were competing against the EMYs of the world and the PwCs, et cetera. And so it became apparent very early on that we really had to understand audit. We had to understand assessment and compliance and how to communicate it. And so I was a resident bookworm for some of the early stages of the firm. And for about 15 years or so, I ran the attest practice. So anything in the SOC reporting, HIPAA attestations, basically anything that requires a CPA, it was primarily my responsibility from a research and development methodology standpoint. Our CEO tapped me maybe about 2 years ago and said, "Hey, would you like to take an internal role as a chief knowledge officer and be responsible for a lot of our internal training and continue to work with the methodology?" And I said, "Hey, why not?" So it sounds great. So I've been doing that and doing some things on our training services, and so I've been busy, still having fun 2 decades in.
That's great. That's great. And today we're going to talk about audit success metrics, both from an auditor perspective. And I learned something today. Actually, all these years, we as customers refer to all auditors as third-party auditors, 3PAOs. And I was informed that that's really a FedRAMP term. Learn something new every day, right? It shows what an engineer who's been doing it from the engineering side for lots of years learns about compliance every day, which is so exciting. So we're going to talk about audit success metrics. And I know that, through a lot of the programs that I've been working over the last 15 plus years, starting from an engineering perspective, running a very large project where compliance, we had to do all the SDL and change management stuff, all the way to today where my team now does a lot of major SaaS services. I would say that the one thing that's always stuck out to me is how we measure success in an audit in particular. So Buck, why don't you give us, how do you as a auditor, how do you measure success of an audit for a customer?
Man, that's a fair question. I'm gonna answer the question, but I'm gonna do it in two ways. I'm gonna give you sort of an abstract and then a real world example of what it is that I'm referring to, right? So measuring success, what I hear when you say that is you're saying, "Buck, how do you know it was worth it? How do you know when it's all said and done, was it worth it? Was it worth what? Was it worth your time?" Right? So time being that scarce resource is what it is. So I'm going to answer it through that lens. Was it worth our time? Right? So we're, all 3PAOs, to my knowledge, are for-profit organizations, right? Very few of them will do, although we do some charitable work and that sort of thing. It's got to make money, right? Just being an organization, being in a business, for-profit organization, it needs to make money. So from a profitability standpoint, certainly is going to be one aspect of measuring audit success. And that's really having less to do with the fact that it's an audit and more to do with is just what a for-profit business does. Anything that we do, particularly in the realm of professional services, the question is, was it worth the time, right? And so was it profitable either in the short term or in the long term through those relationships? And so that's an abstract answer, but a concrete example of that is essentially how do we measure and manage and monitor the profit on particular jobs, right? How much time consumption is involved with delivering a particular audit or compliance or assessment, things of that sort. So that's an easy one, right? Is it profitable or not? Now we start to get into a little bit more of the gray area. Was it worth it? Was it worth our time? Well, the experience. And again, I know that kind of sounds abstract, but really what I'm referring to here is both externally and internally. When I ask our clients, was it worth it? They will either say, no, you guys suck. Hopefully they don't say that very often, right? Or they would say, no, that was fantastic. That was as enjoyable as an audit could possibly be. And hopefully there's a lot of that. Well, how do you measure that? How do we monitor that? We have a couple of different ways, some of the rudimentary questionnaires that we would ask. We also use Net Promoter Score. And I believe Net Promoter Score, that's been around for a good while now. I think it was Bain and Company that came up with that phrase. Effectively, we're trying to determine what is the loyalty or the overall experience from our clients when they undergo one of our assessments. Would they recommend us, to their colleagues or other organizations? And the way that manifests itself in a very real world sense is, will they buy more services from us, right? Not only will they continue to buy a particular assessment, but will they buy other assessments? Maybe they start out with a SOC 2. Are they interested in ISO? Are they interested in FedRAMP? So on and so. So we monitor those things to help us understand the question, was it worth it? And the third one, we do that externally. We also do it internally. Yeah, we actually evaluate our clients internally, and we'll ask our team members, our principals and directors, people that are responsible for the project, and we evaluate our clients internally. Would you recommend this client to other parts of the business, right? And so we do sort of that analysis in order to make sure that, yes, we're evaluating our clients. And Milan, I'll be honest with you, have there been times where we've said, yes, we need to part ways with a particular organization? Sure. Were they profitable? Yeah, they were profitable. Did they like us? Yeah, they liked us. But the level of risk that was involved with serving that particular client and perhaps the way that they treated our people might not have been as enjoyable as otherwise it needs to be. And the third area, so it's got to be profitable, right? The experience has got to be worth it. And then risk management, because there are some organizations that we've done audits for and assessments with that the risk profile changes over time. They can start off with the relationship. Yeah, it's a great organization, great client, but over time, whether it's and not necessarily because of security breaches and those sort of things, but as an auditor, we do have intimate knowledge of some of the security practices and not practices at particular organizations. And then obviously, if there are breaches and things of that sort, the world becomes aware of some of those things. So just from a risk standpoint, sometimes it's just too risky to serve a particular industry or a particular organization within an industry. And from time to time, we have to say no, much like many organizations, many assessor firms would say no. So money, experience, and risk.
Okay, so let's hang on those for a minute, because I think the first one that you talk about is money. So let's talk about that.
Yeah,
I have to tell you, like, when you talk about it that way, it has to be profitable. As a customer, how do I know that you are not making it more profitable by billing me more hours, almost like attorneys, right? And this is what I mean by that. I don't necessarily see where audit firms are incentivized to have an efficient audit for customers, because that equates to less hours. Do you agree or disagree with that?
I would tend to agree. Unless you adopt a fixed fee model, which is what we've got. So we work. Your question has merit, because you're asking me, well, Ryan, how do I know if I'm being taken advantage of? If there's an organization, if there's an assessor firm out there that is motivated, has a financial incentive to just charge more hours, well, how do I know that, how much is enough, right? Well, we try to make it so that it just doesn't matter to our clients, because we give them a fixed fee. And if we are extremely inefficient, then that becomes our burden, our problem to solve, not necessarily, our client's problem to solve. So that's the mindset of the attitude. It isn't that we don't want to be profitable. We just want that to be our burden and not the burden of our clients or organizations that we work with.
No, that's fair. But what I would tell you is that all audits are bid with a fixed fee, right? Like there's usually a fee plus.
That's right.
So what the reason I go back to that question is because that measurement, right? Your measurement of profitability is not necessarily a financial measurement that a customer would use, right? From my perspective.
That's
From my
true. That's true.
perspective, the efficiency is how I actually save money, right? So it may almost seem at odds that, you're about profitability. My profitability is spending less time in an audit, right? The more efficient
Interesting.
it is.
That's right. Yeah.
But I don't actually think that they are misaligned because, and the reason I think I wanted to focus on this one because this is
Yeah.
the one that I've seen to be the biggest challenge between customers or businesses and auditors is that they haven't aligned the financial numbers and what that gives us. Like, for example, if I can show that a certain auditor is very efficient, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like they're not costing me extra time with regressions and asking me to pull engineers into meetings all the time and all of that. That actually builds a lot of trust and it makes me more credible in an audit schedule with my engineers. Who
That's
am I
right.
likely to give more money to, right? Like who am I going to give
That's
more
right.
business to? Is
That's
these
right.
companies that do
Exactly.
that. And so, but
That's right.
when I ask about success metrics, as a matter of fact, I'll just bring this one up because I actually went to a random, I get these random webinars about SOC audits and stuff. So I picked one. I said, I'm going to go into
Mm-hmm.
this. It's some auditor that I don't work with this individual. I don't really know them. And so I listened to it. And at the end, they said, do you have any questions? And I typed in questions. I said, how do you measure audit success for your customers, right? I just asked a random question. I wanted to know what some random auditor, audit lead, which is manager would give me. I said, well,
Yeah.
we can tell you the number of SOC audits we do for different customers, how many per year. And I said, but it goes back to that context, which is
That's right.
that doesn't align, right? Like that doesn't align with mine. And I think that one of the reasons I was so excited to have you here today was to talk
Yeah.
about like really from somebody who's been doing it for a long time, what that
That's right.
success metric is. And so I totally agree with you that there is a way to align the financial piece of it, but
That's right.
it's not usually couched that way when it comes to actually identifying the success metric that's going to work on both sides. Because again, I do think that's a
Absolutely.
challenge that like if an auditor frankly is inefficient, they get to bill me more hours, or they'll just build it into the initial bid, right? They'll say,
That's
well,
right.
it's going to cost this much versus this much because we know it's going to take more and that's more time I can build. So anyway, I think that's a great one to have in terms of, thinking about what that success metric looks like. So yeah, I think that's great.
That's right.
It's really an interesting space.
And to your point, fixed fee doesn't solve everything, right? I mean, because as you mentioned, you sort of build in some inefficiency there, right? So I think that if I were in your shoes or any firm or any organization that was going to be audited, it'd be a couple of things. One, I would certainly seek out, let's start with the fixed fee model because that creates an incentive for the auditor, for the assessor to become more efficient, right? Because the top line numbers should not grow unless there is additional value or unless there is, really a burden or some significant pushback. They say it's going to cost, $100K to do an audit, and the auditor shows up. They did everything that they could do. They've asked the questions, but maybe an organization is saying, "Hey, no, it'll be another 2 months before we can get you that evidence here." Right. So there's some delays that can actually cause the number to rise. But generally speaking, number one, having a fixed fee, I think, is a good first step for an organization because it does create sort of a ceiling, if you would, with respect to how long it should take. Because we're really talking about time, Milan. No matter whether it's on your side or it's on the assessor side, saving your engineers time is what I'm hearing is a valuable value proposition in and of itself. Because whether they, as much as I like to think that auditors and assessors are good conversation, the reality is, no one gets paid to actually entertain the auditors, right? They have, especially on the engineer standpoint, they actually have, jobs and other things that they would much rather do and much rather, and certainly need to get done. So any time saved so that they can do their discharge their primary responsibilities in lieu of speaking to the assessors and the auditors. That in and of itself has some value associated with it, which I think is something that we focus on as well. How much time can we save our clients?
No, that's great.
Which is tough
So
to
yeah,
measure.
yeah. So I think I totally agree that that has definitely been an area that I know has been challenging internally on the customer side. But when you mentioned one of your metrics, like the customer sat, how did the audit go?
That's
Can you
right.
get into more of the specifics around what you mean and how you measure that?
That's right. So Net Promoter Score, as one example, we will send soft surveys out during the engagement, after the engagement. More qualitative. Hey, how did we do? Right. And so we sort of have those conversations with our clients. But to more the point, more quantitatively, what we'll do is when we use Net Promoter Score, and there's a whole algorithm or function related to it, very simple math. You really are looking at the responses that you get from your clients every engagement. You can't cherry pick, right? Every single project, every single engagement, you ask your customer basically, would you recommend us, to other organizations or colleagues? How satisfied were you, with the service that you received? And it's something like either a 9 or above. It's on a scale of 10, so it's a 9 or above, and those are considered sort of the promoters, if you would. And then on that same scale, from I think it's 7 to 8, those are the passive. Yeah, you guys were great. You guys were good. It was an audit, right? No big deal. Don't pat yourself on the back. See you next year, sort of thing. Those are sort of the passive, if you would, clients. They're not necessarily promoters. They don't count against the score, but they're there. Anything from 0 to 6 is essentially we dropped the ball somewhere, right? Like, and we net those out, so they arrive at the Net Promoter Score. You're looking at all of the 9s and 10s, and then you're subtracting out everyone 6 or below. And what that does is that provides us as an organization with feedback. Hey, on whole, yeah, will there be one engagement that is just fantastic, just cloud nine, just wow, could not have done any better, all around experience? Yeah, high fives all around. Perfect. Are there going to be assessments that it's going to be, hey, man, that could have really gone a lot better than what it did? Either we were late on some things or whatever the case may be, it could have gone better. Absolutely. So when you look at it from a broad base, you're looking at, thousands of clients over a period of a year's time. What is the net score? And that tends to give us a sense, hey, we need to continue to do these things, or we need to stop doing these things and start doing other things. That way we can begin to deep dive. So from a quantitative standpoint, we'll use things like the Net Promoter Score to sort of give us an idea of the overall health of our services across a broad base of clients. Qualitatively, we will have transactional or point in time sort of correspondence with our clients. Hey, how did we do on this during our sales process? How did we do during the reporting process? Or we'll have larger relationship or relational outreach to our clients to get a sense over longer periods of time. I will tell you this, Milan, not that this is about Schellman in any way, but about 70% of all of our clients use us for multiple services. We track that, we monitor that, because that is a vote of confidence that if we start out with a PCI assessment, but this client or this organization is thinking about maybe, having to do business in the EU, and they've got some concerns or questions about privacy regulation abroad, and they look to us for either ISO 27001 with, extended sets for privacy, or for GDPR assessments, and they say, hey, can you guys do this? Can you guys do that? That in and of itself is something that is a vote of confidence, and we track that accordingly.
That's great. So, no,
Mm.
that makes sense. Let's jump to the third one. And Vanessa had a great question for you, actually. So I'll throw it up here. So the question is, what are the risks you watch for at clients' orgs that you work with that you consider a cost to the business?
That's right. So there are some, particularly with social media, but there's a much broader and greater awareness of the communities that we serve, the communities that we live in, or the environment that we operate in. And so you can just turn on the news on any given day, and there's going to be a hot button issue here or there. Generally speaking, we tend to avoid political action committees. They tend to be bad for business, right? There are going to be certain industries, whether it is in adult film or adult entertainment, or other types of industries that come with them a certain degree of social risk, right? They're going to be people that are going to be highly sensitive to a particular organization, the business that they're in, the industry that they operate in, and then they begin to look at, okay, well, who are their partners? Who are they affiliated with? And so at the firm, we always take a close look at not only can we do the work, because that is a risk too. You can't say yes to every opportunity. There's certain skills that are actually necessary that you need to cultivate so that you can say, yes, we're comfortable putting our name on this particular service. And so there's a certain amount of, I would say, understanding and knowledge that we need to have as assessors before we say, yes, we're willing to do certain work. So that's number one, or that is a consideration. Are we competent in actually delivering what it is that the organization needs? And then the second one, or another one, is what, yes, we're competent, we can do it, but do we want to operate in this particular industry?
Mm-hmm.
And if so, do we want to operate with this particular organization? Again, separate and apart from whether or not they've had a data breach, because it's the 21st century. Everyone's had a data breach. And if you haven't had a data breach, shame on you for not knowing that you've had a data breach and where to find it, right? So everyone's had a data breach. But it's more so about a general attitude and a climate. There have been organizations that we've served over the years to where management just really doesn't care about security. They just care about the badge, or they care about compliance. And that's a high risk proposition. It can over a long period of time, it can begin to show itself in all sorts of ways, to where the only thing that matters to that organization is getting that trophy at the end of the assessment. And we have a front row seat to a lot of practices that are very high risk, or not only for them but for us. And do we want to associate our name with yet another organization that's probably not doing the right things, or certainly doing the wrong things? Good question.
No, that makes sense. And yeah, I could totally see that. I think that's a whole nother topic about the
It
balance
is.
and necessity between compliance and security, both in fact and then obviously in theory, about keeping things secure, even though you might be compliant. Sometimes I could see there's that risk profile when you see things that you definitely want to kind of deal with as you go on. So let's switch gears a little bit. There's another question, but we'll save it because I think it'll play in a little bit better later. So let's talk about, from where you're sitting after 20 years, what do you think when it comes to, audits and the metrics? What do you think is the next big opportunity or thing that neither customers or auditors are working on together that will really move the needle forward? What do you think that next opportunity is for
Well, I
audits?
tell you what, yeah, assessors, I think auditors really have, we're not early adopters oftentimes, right? And so I can remember starting my career, well, over 20 years ago. I guess it was a lot of Y2K assessments and things of that sort. It seemed like the auditors were there to try to figure out, our server's going to go offline here in the next year or two. And that same mindset, unfortunately, I do believe can still persist in the auditor and the assessor community, where it's like, what is the next emergency that we need to be on the lookout for? And what do we need to do in order to, well, make money with it, number one. And number two, what do we need to do in order to package it up into a particular way so that we can deliver it as a particular service? And there's a lot of catch up, So when you talk about generative AI and what's happening on the front with that, there's going to be a lot of things that auditors have gotten very used to, in the same way we used to get used to things with the old waterfall methodology for change management. And then as things became, more agile and more CI/CD, and we started to do less and less with, with mainframes and midframes, and more with containers and ephemeral systems and things of that, there needed to be a shift away from the auditor, the standard, the documentation, sort of the protocol for audit. We had to sort of put that down and start to pivot and look at where actually is the security risk, where actually is the compliance risk. And that takes time. It takes time to basically say, we're going to set down the standard for a moment. We're going to look at where the risk is. We're going to modify what it is that we need to do, and we're going to adapt to that. And then, oh, by the way, the standards usually come, after that point. So what I see as a particular challenge is for assessors to really to close the gap, the window of time between new and emergent technologies and the risk associated with them, and then creating these standards that will support them, because auditors, if we're anything, we are not mavericks. We will follow the standard. We will obey sort of the prescription and the proscriptive doctrines of whatever governing body it is. And sometimes, even if it's not the most prudent thing to do from a security standpoint, we have to make sure that we follow the standard, the guidance, so that those that receive our reports and understand what the compliance objectives were, they can have sort of that sense of consistency and understanding. But I got to tell you, Milan, it's really sort of closing that gap, being more on the cutting edge, or I don't want to say cutting edge, being more in tune with the emerging technologies and the emerging threats, and being able to adapt the methodology, adapt the audit procedures, so that it really gets to the point and focuses on risk, much less on sort of the routine and sort of what people have gotten comfortable with over time.
Yeah, I think that from a customer perspective on that, there's two aspects of that are important. And I think one of them is the scalability. Like, we're struggling with, how do we scale? I mean, the compliance numbers of frameworks, we've talked about this in other previous live streams as well, is they're just growing rapidly, but a lot of them are closely aligned, right? And you have to be efficient business-wise. Like, you need to make money. We can't afford to lose money by the overweight process of having to throw bodies and gather more evidence. I mean, we have to efficiently be able to do that at scale. And I think that's one of the things that, I talk about the blank checkbook and the bat, compliance. Everybody knows you have to do compliance. So the incentive to be efficient wasn't really there, at least from my own personal working through it for many years. I had to get efficient when I was in an engineering team because I was only one person. So if I wasn't efficient with it, I would just get crushed, right? I had 1,000 pieces of evidence that I was responsible for, a team of one. So I think, the necessity breeds that for one thing. And then the cost, because the cost, as we found, is not only to the dollar amount, but it's to the engineers, because every hour an engineer spends doing a repetitive function for an audit, which should be automated anyway, probably, that's another hour they're not writing new features, which are going to help us make more money as well. So I think that's the one way we look at it now, is compliance as a real business, not just as a function, is the one thing I know that's been changing, at least on the customer side for us. But then the other one is, which I think is very interesting, and I'm not so sure how that plays out, but the faster you change the compliance requirements, the harder it is to automate it, right? So I think there's a healthy balance, because that takes work. If you change the requirement, well, that means usually automation changes, evidence changes. So I think there is a healthy balance of figuring out how to proactively flow these in. And I think that's been an area that's been challenged, because I mean, I've been in this case in the past, especially my, not currently, but my previous job as an engineer. In the middle of the audit, like, well, we need these another 6 pieces of evidence. I go, well, wait a minute, those weren't on the list. I didn't plan for that. Like, I put people to go do that. So part of, this, I would call the negotiated settlement, is some level of, I won't say standardization, but consistency in ask and consistency of change. Because again, I have to fund it on the other end. So when you say the customer SAT goes down, nothing made my SAT go down faster than in the middle of an audit where I get hit with a bunch of new evidence requests that I didn't budget for, or that they were unclear. And we've talked about this previously as well, to where I think I gave you what you wanted, but the requirement wasn't specific enough. So, there was interpretation there. So you need more. And that also went directly to customer sat and cost, because now that's another few hours I got to go pull from some engineer to go grab something else yet. So I do think, like, as we continue to merge these audit requirements, I think there's a lot of good room for opportunity in how do we build that without, as we say, ultimate goals to ensure that we're secure, that we're meeting the audit requirements, right? Like, that is the number one trust vehicle from our perspective for our customers, is they can look at a third-party assessment and say, yes, you've met all the minimum requirements as tested, which I think is great. So this is a good time for Vanessa's question, I think. So we'll throw it up here. So how do you maintain efficiency, save costs to the business, yet without losing the integrity and assessment quality, which is what we were just talking about?
That's right. Great question. And I will say this, it really, Vanessa, it's about and I'll use a perfect example of what Milan was just speaking about. Okay, so the requirements change. So if the requirements change as an assessor, that has just increased my risk, because now I need to make sure that I've got the right people that understand the right thing. They're going to test it in the right way. And so just because it's a change in the requirements themselves, it adds risk. And so now it is going to take me, or take the organization, the assessor, longer to get to the same level of assurance that I was in the last version of the standard, right? And so in the last version of the standard, let's just say there were 48 things that needed to be done. Now in the new version of the standard, there's 53 things that need to be done, or maybe it's 30 things, but they're different things, right? Because sometimes the overall number of requirements can go down, but the nature of and the extent of testing to get to the same level of assurance, is different. Well, that's more work that goes into that. And so if in year one, I say the audit's going to cost 50 grand, and in year two, the audit is going to still cost 50 grand. Now I need to get to the same level of assurance and do more work. And so does it motivate me or incentivize me to maybe cut corners, maybe put, junior people on it, right? Maybe, people that don't know as much, in order to, maybe save some money or recoup some money by not putting more expensive resources? Or do I put more expensive resources on it because I know that they're going to understand the changes to the compliance standard? Maybe they've got more continuity. It's the calculus that you have to go through in order to still make it make sense. I think sometimes it can't be overstated, and it's important. But at the end of the day, the one thing that I would say any assessment firm, certainly here at our firm, that is the immovable object is how effectively do you manage risk? Have there been times where we've had to just lose money on a job or not be as profitable in order to make sure that we've done it the right way? Absolutely, that's the case. And when you speak about integrity, independence, which is another immovable object, there's just certain lines you can't cross, And so I used to work at Arthur Andersen long ago, so I know what can happen to a firm seemingly overnight when their reputation in the marketplace dissolves or deteriorates. And so integrity, operating in an ethical manner, maintaining an independence, that essentially trumps everything. And so the challenge is, how do we maintain that same level of trust and reliability and dependability as an assessor, and do so in the most efficient way possible? And depending on the scenario, it might make sense to use less expensive resources to get through certain parts of the project, and in other parts of the project, use more expensive resources that are more familiar with the assessment, with the client, with the organization, with the technology that they're reviewing. And so it's a blended model at times in order to try to achieve or recoup some profitability. But it's a very overused phrase in business these days. But at the end of the day, you can't cross the independence line. You can't cross the integrity line, because that is very difficult to recover from. That is extremely costly. Doing the wrong thing, in the wrong way, even if you think it'll save some money, can't happen.
No, I totally agree with that, and I think that definitely that wouldn't change probably for anybody in this business in terms of keeping the quality and the integrity.
Yeah.
And then sometimes you have to do more work. I think when you find certain things that happen, it's like, yep, you got to roll the sleeves up. I mean, that's the whole point of an audit, right? Sometimes you might catch something that slipped through, but our goal is to obviously not have things slip through. Because I think the one thing that I would be interested to hear about from an assessor perspective is what's next in this space, right? I think you talked a little bit about being able to move with rapidly changing requirements, which I agree with. But what does that mean to you as an assessor? Like specifically, give an example of something that you think would, like, if you pick one thing to change tactically with how these audits work today, what would you change?
Oh, that's a great question. I would probably say more awareness of what's happening abroad with respect to not just one thing that I will say, that as assessors here in the United States or in North America, we become very familiar with and used to receiving a lot of our instruction, namely all of our instruction for certain types of assessments, from North American industry specific governing bodies. Mm-hmm. And when you have that particular mindset and approach, whatever there may be very good reasons why certain things in the United States or in North America aren't adopted. Maybe, because our commerce, our markets are different. A prime example of this is in the privacy space. When you look at what assessors are asked to do from a privacy standpoint and what businesses are asked to do from a privacy standpoint, well, we compete in a global marketplace, but the United States does not have privacy law. We have effectively these balkanized versions of privacy laws on a state by state basis. Yeah, there's some things that you can or can't do in Texas or in California or in Massachusetts or in Michigan, but there's almost this network, if you would, of various privacy legislation and privacy requirements. But then if you look to the EU, you look at something like GDPR, you look abroad, then they've got in my opinion, a more forward thinking, more advanced understanding and appreciation of privacy legislation. Doesn't make it better or worse. Different commerce or commercial environments and operating environments, but it is something to where I believe in certain respects the assessor community and the auditor community in North America has had to look to the EU in order to get better foresight and understanding of the direction of privacy law and legislation. Because guess what? Our organizations are doing, our clients are doing it. They have to look to the EU, right? And so I think what assessors and compliance and auditors would do themselves a favor with is thinking outside of the North American box with respect to where things are headed, so that industries within North America can adopt these policies, perhaps before the SEC does or before the AICPA does. Continue to work with those groups. Obviously, I mean, we're bound by ethics and legislation and regulatory requirements and those sort of things. So by no means am I asking auditors to become mavericks. But I am saying that in order to, close that gap, as I was mentioning before about emerging technologies, the same thing happens from a compliance standpoint, a regulatory compliance standpoint in particular. Begin to close that gap in your understanding of it and look to what's happening in APAC and EMEA, particularly as it relates to privacy in the EU and even in South America, and having that a wide angle lens to compliance, not so much exactly what is happening in North America, because a lot of our North America constituents are operating on a more global scale beyond sort of the bounds or, the edges of paper that we're dealing with now through current SEC laws and regulations and the AICPA, et cetera.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think that's been an ongoing challenge. And from a business perspective, it's a matter of cost and if you and when. Because again, moving proactive, there's a very distinct cost to that, right? Like if you go invest in it, it may or may not actually become a regulation. And so are you over investing in something? So I do think though that more work has to be done about how do you quantify from a business decision-making perspective, like when to go after those things in earnest versus just a gap analysis or an understanding. And I think I agree with you that is a challenging space today as all these things kind of merge together. And, EU tends to be only generally speaking, kind of advanced in their thinking on privacy and data management, right? You see all the newest stuff come out, but even the White House today are coming out with like AI, memos and stuff. So I do think though that that's an area that many smaller compliance teams don't have the ability to actually go function in, right? Many smaller compliance teams, they're funded to go do audits. And what we're really talking about is what we call product development. Like if compliance is a product, you need to go look at the market research and all that. And I think what you'll find is that, at least what I found, even on my own engineering teams, is that those skill sets are, and the focus is different, right? And the success criteria is different. And so I think that is a great one to call out that, hey, and I agree with you that that's an area where I think all of the compliance teams need to try to take that larger view in order to get ahead of things. So you're not like 2 years late when it comes to delivering something, or at least notifying engineers and getting in their feature lists and those sorts of things. So no, I totally agree with that. I think the challenge comes down to, which is a whole other topic, about how compliance teams are chartered and based on what their roles are. Because again, I've seen compliance teams where that is no part of their role today, where it's going to look broadly. Nope, you go sales needs a SOC audit for this product, you go get the SOC
That's right.
audit, right? And then you're fighting with the scheduling because it could take you 6 months if you haven't done any prep work to go get it done, and then they can't sell. So I think that's a good one. And I totally agree that I would probably look at the scalability. I would probably call it scalability, but it's really the same thing about how do
Yeah,
you scale out to all these requirements. And I do think it is a slightly different mindset of scope and charter for compliance teams if they're going into that space.
that's right.
And so I think that's a good one. But I would like to ask you from a tactical audit perspective, what's the one thing that you would like to see your customers do to make audits better? The top thing, maybe not the one thing because there's more than one, but what's the top one?
I'll say I'll give you three things. I'll give you three things. And this is going to be a peculiar answer because in certain respects this will make our lives more difficult as an assessor. But the top two things are going to go hand in hand with each other. One is become more knowledgeable about the subject matter, right? There's a lot of double speak in the audit community, in the audit world. A lot of acronyms. We love acronyms, right? But when was the last time you actually asked an auditor, what does that acronym mean? And just watched a deer in the headlights. And it's like, oh, I don't know, right? And it isn't necessarily a gotcha moment or a scenario where you have to say, aha, you're incompetent. You have no idea what it is that you're doing. No, not so much, as it really leads to the second thing is why. And here's what I'm getting at with why. You mentioned earlier on that, you could ask for, maybe 30 things to get through a particular portion of an audit. And then now it just grew to 36. There are 6 additional things. And that costs you money because now you have to go back to the engineering team. You have to ask for these 6 additional things. And many clients, many organizations, what are they going to do? They're going to go back. They're going to say, okay, stop doing that. Grab these other 6 items, go meet with the auditor. And no one ever asks why. Because even though the standard may have changed, the compliance, sort of the rubric, if you would, may have changed for a particular type of audit, usually the reason why has not. And so the second thing that I would ask an organization to do to make them better clients, if you would, is become more knowledgeable about the subject matter and then begin to push back on the auditors and ask the auditors why. Why do you want this? Why do you need this? It isn't to quiz the auditor as much as it is to get the auditor and the assessor to begin to think about, well, I guess the why really hasn't changed. I don't need these 6 additional items. I could probably get the same information, reach the same level of assurance, and maybe pivot and ask for this particular artifact instead of that particular artifact. And the reason why I'm saying that might make our lives more difficult in the short term is because I see the long-term return on that investment. That if you have more knowledgeable clients, more knowledgeable organizations that are undergoing these assessments, and more knowledgeable and thoughtful assessors that are asking the questions, well, why am I asking for these 6 additional items? I probably could just get 2 additional items, or maybe I've been looking for the wrong 30 to begin with. I can begin to look inward as an assessor and say, hey, you know what? Let me strategize a little bit differently here because the why to this can be achieved in a different way that's more efficient. Auditors, we're very used to the routine. If we can get through, if it takes us 10 steps to get through a particular process, guess what we're doing next year? And guess what we're doing the year after that? Now, there's some benefit to having that level of consistency. But from time to time, you need to ask yourself, you as a client or an organization undergoing these audits, me as an assessor performing these audits, every now and then it probably makes sense to say, why does it take 10 steps? And if technologies are changing, regulations are changing, standards are changing, this doesn't necessarily mean that the audit should just cost more and take longer. It might be a good opportunity for us to revisit the entire methodology and say, because of this change, the why probably has changed, and maybe we could look at this and approach this in a different way. With that mindset, I think that's where a vector for efficiency can actually be useful because people are taking the time and they're asking, well, why? Why do you need that? Why are you asking for that? Because if I understood, auditor, why you wanted it, I may be able to provide you with a more efficient route and path to get exactly what you need, maybe with a higher degree of assurance and a higher degree of reliability. And so I would say that having clients that understand the subject matter, you're getting a PCI assessment done. The people that are on your compliance team, had they undergone any PCI training? The people that are on your FedRAMP team, had they undergone any FedRAMP training? Or are they just going to roll and do whatever the auditor says, right? I think having organizations, compliance teams, and engineers and others that can speak the language, or at least have someone that can operate on an engineer's behalf and say, that doesn't quite make sense. That's not what I understand out of NIST 853 revision 5, right? You're able to have that thoughtful communication conversation to improve efficiency for yourself, and then also thoughtfully challenge the auditor so that they can promote efficiency in their own practices and organizations. I think I said I was going to give you 3. I think those 2 things are probably a little bit better. The top 2 things that I would say.
No, I agree with that. And I think one of the ones that I know I kind of ask of the auditors from the customer side is, and I'll put it in 2 parts because I think they kind of align with what you talked about. Number 1 is give me a good spec for what you want tested, right? That goes back to why, because if it's not specific, if it's specific, then I've always been able to figure out like what you're actually asking for. It's when it's ambiguous, I'm not exactly sure. It goes back to well, why are you asking for that? So I think for me, I always say, look, give me a really good, when you talk about the IRLs and kind of what you're looking for, because then if it's specific, then we can go through and I can give you a sample and you can say, well, will this meet the requirement ahead of the audit? A lot of times that work happens in the audit, right? So you're trying to debug the ask in the middle of an 8-week audit, ideally, where that clarification, not only is it a fire drill, but it could have been avoided because you really don't have the time at that point to have those conversations. Right? You have to go get the evidence because you're fighting the deadline to the audit. So you don't really have the ability to question and go back. So for me, it's about, proactively doing that work is really important. And I know we've seen on our side a lot of benefits, of doing that, because then the audit goes smoothly because you've worked out all the bugs, as we call it from an engineering perspective, before the audit. 95% of the case. That's our metric for FTR, which we've talked about in other live streams. But the point being is that I agree with you on that. Now, I do agree that as things change, I think the other ask on that from the customer side is, how do we get ahead of that? Like, how do we understand what changes you need from that direction well before the audit, right? So we can go plan it out. We can go figure out the right evidence changes. Because again, my whole goal, one of my big goals is to not have that unplanned work, is what I call that, in the middle of the audit. Anytime I have to go back for evidence more than once, it's unplanned work. I know I have to collect it once, whether it's automated or manual, right? That's on my end. But if I have to do it more than once, then it's unplanned work, which of course makes engineers upset because they have to use that time versus other things, which goes back to customer sat, right, in the end. So, I agree with you. I think those are great items to focus on for specific tactical things that on both sides, it can make it a much more streamlined experience. I think that's great.
And Milan, I would encourage you or any organization to make it an SLA, make it a service level agreement with the assessor to say, hey, you guys are at the forefront, or you should be at the forefront of PCI going from 3.2.1 to 4.0. That if NIST is going through another revision from 4 to 5, if there's going to be, the CMMC standard is going from version 1. Whatever to version 2, this is your wheelhouse, right? So you're the assessor, you're the compliance auditor. These are your tools. These are the things on your shelves that you should be very familiar with. As an organization that is going to have to demonstrate that we're going to be in compliance with those things, we need to come to an agreement that whether it's on a quarterly basis or 6 months before the assessment, let's see if we can go down a list of, have there been any material changes in the industry that are in the standard themselves or in the regulations that would require us, or are you planning for there to be a different methodology or audit approach, or even just different types of evidence or artifacts to be collected? I would say go ahead and have that question in advance. And certainly I would always encourage any organization undergoing an audit to learn more and to be trained more on the particular subject matter. But let's just be honest here, assessors, this is what assessors do all day, every day, and they have an awareness of what's coming down the pipe. I think that having that thoughtful communication and creating that expectation that, hey, we're going to meet every 90 days, once a quarter, and you're going to provide me with the top 5, top 2, top 20, if it ever came to that, things that need to be considered, which was the case back in December of 2019. The SOC 2, for example, went through a major overhaul. And so it was necessary for us to not only train our people internally, but also our clients on what to expect with something as boilerplate as a SOC 2. I say boilerplate, but it's out there. Everyone understands and is very familiar with the SOC 2. And that was a well-worn path for many, many years. And then seemingly overnight, it wasn't. The SCPA took their time with it, at least a few years, few cycles. But that shift, that change from what happened in December of 2019 to beyond, that was very dramatic of a change with respect to SOC 2. Well, this is what we do all day, right? So we sort of have I think a burden, or at least an obligation, to facilitate and assist our clients with that understanding as well. So to your point, very long-winded way of saying I agree with you. I would highly encourage you to consider an SLA, lowercase SLA, right? This doesn't necessarily need to be something written and burned into contract, but there should be at least some, general person's agreement to say, hey, let's have contacts, touch points throughout the year, to where if there's something that we should be changing, even if it's like the 2020 this ISO is changing from 2013. I think there's still a couple of years for that. It's like, yeah, what do we need to be thinking about now so that isn't a major surprise for us in a couple of years' time? Those sorts of conversations, but more importantly, the expectation of your assessor to be able to provide that, I think, is going to be important, and it shouldn't cost you anything extra. That's matter of fact.
I'll remember that.
Yeah, hopefully
I have it on video. It shouldn't cost me anything. I love it.
Hopefully your assessor is willing to have you understand what to expect, because it's going to make their lives a lot easier as well.
That's right. So we're pretty much at time now, and I just want to say thank you for coming on and demystifying some of the conversations between assessors and customers. And so I think that talking about audit metrics is near and dear to a lot of people, especially in the compliance role on the customer side, because it is a big part of our lives and our livelihood. I mean, that's what we do. It's one of the big deliverables for our companies, for our engineers, and for our leadership team, to not only open new revenue markets, because you sometimes need the assessment to do that, but also as a trust vehicle that we're doing all the right things, whether it's security or HIPAA or whatever. So again, Buck, I just want to say thanks for joining. And I'm sure it sounds like we have a couple of other topics we might be able to tee up for the future as well. Any last minute words for the audience before we sign this one off?
I would just say that, thanks for everyone for joining. This is something that I have always wanted to do, and I'm so grateful to Milan for inviting me. And yeah, there are a few more topics. You talk about AI, you can't spell audit without AI, right? So
that's right. Yeah, we're going to have to talk about that for sure. So real quickly for the crowd, if you have any questions, please do put them down, and I'll make sure that I'll get answers from Buck as well. If you have any questions, put them in the comments, and we'll kind of keep an eye on it. And also, if you like this and you want other topics, please do recommend them. Put them in down below, and I can bring Buck on, or he can bring on somebody else from his audit firm if it's not him, or we can even do more than one on here for more of a panel format. So again, if you want to get notifications, go ahead and subscribe and hit the bell, and you'll know when the next ones are scheduled. So with that, I want to thank everyone, and I want to thank you, Buck, from Schellman, for coming.
My pleasure.
And we'll see you all next time.
Outstanding. Take care.